actually see it, so I just want to make sure that folks know that this is being recorded.
Go ahead, Ms. Miller.
Hi, everybody. I'm Erin Miller. I'm the Director of Student Services. It's great to see so many faces here tonight. I'm looking forward to supporting coordinators and special educators and your families through the IEP process. So thanks for being here.
Okay, with that, I will get us kicked off. So, in phase one, around March 9th after we closed, our staff went to work to create, and I'm going to just kind of admit people as I do this. Our staff went to work to create a virtual learning environment that was really what was inclusive of what the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education are now considering special ed remote learning. Teachers who had content level courses, or they co-taught, or they taught in sub-separate environments, immediately kind of implemented special ed virtual chats and activities aligned with our general ed enrichment peers. So those schedules were set, and kids started participating in those chats with their classes. At the same time, our special ed service providers kind of created this robust enrichment bank of all these services aligned to kids' individual needs. We've modified that many times. We've tried to create a system where it's easier to navigate, and that enrichment bank is still live today. It can be found here. It can also be found on our district website and in many of the correspondence that we've sent to families. So we encourage folks to continue to take advantage of that. And then teachers, case managers, and service providers communicated with everyone about kind of when the classroom chat schedules would be, how to access the enrichment bank, what to access in the enrichment bank, and then also held office hours with students and families. So on April 9th, we kicked off something totally different, what we called our phase two in the special education planning process. Guidance came down from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, as well as the federal government, saying, you know what, there has to be a free and appropriate public education provided during the closure. So at that point in time, even though we had a lot of what Desi was saying that we were required to have in terms of what special ed services would be, our staff really went to work and did a lot to enhance the current practice that from what we called enrichment to now what we call special ed service remote learning. So the special ed coordinators at each school worked with their staff and created an entirely new schedule to provide special ed and related pull-out services instead of kind of adding to the enrichment bank as those folks have done. So now at this point, you have classes that are happening and you have pull-out services on the opposite day that are happening with your kids. And in some cases, there are classes and pull-out services on the same day, depending on the classroom and the assignment that each teacher had. Each parent of a student with an IEP was provided with what we call a special ed remote service plan that addresses their specific needs during closure. There is a message that went out regarding what that looks like, and then kind of how we implemented that. And that message that went out kind of aligned with what those plans look like for each of those kids. Now, it's important to note that, and I know this is the hard part for many families and many students, and actually staff as well, the plans don't replicate services that are in the IEP. They actually, but staff very much so kind of went above and beyond to try to create kind of comprehensive service packages that were aligned to the IEP goals and services to the extent that we can manage during the closure. Keeping in mind that the commissioner had actually said, you know what, we're looking at about 50% of the learning time for general ed kids that we've normally had. So, we're limited in the amount of time that we could have kids online. Oh, great. Again, if you have not received one of those plans, certainly contact your case manager, contact your coordinator, contact me and let me know. We want to make sure that everyone has gotten one. To my knowledge, everyone has, which is great. Those were presented on or after April 9th.
That's because you're on the audio.
Just going to mute. Try to mute Rick here. Okay, sorry. And communication to families and logging of activities obviously was an integral part and component of this phase. So your case manager should have contacted you and/or coordinator should have contacted you and kind of gone through, mostly case managers, and they're also logging activities throughout the process. So that moves us on to what we're now calling phase 3. We know that we're going to be in school or in kind of this remote learning environment for the long haul through the end of the school year, at least. And just admitting one more. So now that specialized remote learning is fully implemented and up and running, we're kind of moving into this phase of specialized remote planning, what we're calling the virtual IEP process. Now, keep in mind that one of our primary goals as we kind of rolled this out was to make sure that the specialized remote learning was fully implemented first before we went to the IEP process. You know, this is certainly a challenge for our staff as well as our families, and making sure that they were equipped to provide the services that they had to provide were very important for us to do before we went to the IEP process. Having said that, now that we're there and our staff are involved and we've had conversations with CPAC and our staff, you know, planning, coordination, agreement, and understanding has to be involved to ensure we have a meaningful IEP process for everyone involved. So we all want to hold IEP team meetings. There's no doubt, right? We have a significant amount of IEPs that were supposed to be held from the time school closed until the end of the school year. But obviously, we're facing challenges that we haven't faced before, right? Things like time. We have kids at home. Everyone's learning to teach in a virtual environment. The staff may or may not be available depending on the schedules, depending on their personal things at their homes, your schedules, the whole 9 yards. These are all reasons that we might have chosen. I'm trying to mute Rick again. Okay. All reasons that we might have chosen not to actually go forward with virtual IEPs. You know, DESE is still only encouraging virtual IEP meetings, and they're actually really encouraging annual IEP meetings, not requiring them. You know, they're really suggesting now that they want them held because, you know, Russell Johnson, who is the associate commissioner, is also concerned about the backlog that might occur when we get back. None of us, you know, want to lose sight of what the IEP is, and that's a guide to the provision of services for our most fragile kids. And we want to make sure that we have that guide for both families and for kids and for staff when we return to the school session. So after we discussed with staff, coordinators, and the Special Ed Parent Advisory Council, and thank you, CPAC, very much, we agreed we could move forward, but needed to do so in a fashion that would work for everyone involved, and to ensure that this could, you know, our primary focus could still be on student instruction. So with that said, we had to consider parameters prior to holding any meetings in the environment. So I'm going to kind of review those parameters now that we hope that parents can agree to, but very important to note, if parents aren't comfortable with the parameters, we don't have to hold the meetings until we return from closure, right? So if we don't have the meeting, the current IEP that is in effect now will continue to remain in effect upon return to school. This is a voluntary activity by parents. We're not forcing. This is just so we can all kind of get on the same page and understand what the IEP will look like when school returns back into session. So having said that, here are some parameters that we kind of put together that we hope folks will agree to when coordinators contact them to schedule meetings over the course of the next 2 months. So we're hoping to hold annual IEP meetings to around a 30-minute time period, and eligibility meetings to about a 45-minute time period. And this is difficult for staff, families. You know, the meetings typically are very significantly long discussions. We want to make sure they're meaningful and we get everything discussed that we need to discuss. But we also want to make sure that teachers have the adequate time to plan for and teach in the virtual environment. As well, you know, in order to schedule the more than 300 meetings prior to the end of the school year, we're asking in flexibility of scheduling those meetings with a shortened notice at a time provided by the coordinator. This doesn't mean you're going to get a call in the morning and say, hey, we're going to have, you know, would you have an IEP with us this afternoon? It would likely be, hey, you know, in a few days, 3 or 4 days, could we have an IEP team meeting? You know, and are you in agreement with that? Can you do that with us? Meetings are only going to be scheduled during case manager's office hours, right? We, you know, working with our teachers who are working incredibly hard to get the instructional strategies and resources and supports out there, have office hours to kind of do this IEP protocol processing, reviews, all those pieces. So we want to make sure they can be providing special ed services to the maximum extent they can. So we're going to be trying to schedule these during their office hours. Meetings are not going to include general education teachers. They're responsible for contact hours with kids throughout their entire time that they're working. And it may not include related service providers. Now, if the related service providers aren't there, there will be reports provided and submitted to the IEP team for us to discuss while we're there. General education teachers will most definitely provide reports to the IEP team, so there can be discussion around that. And that would be something that we'd ask for parents' consent to do. We do have to realize that, you know, in a half an hour period or 45-minute period, we might not create the best IEP that we can, right? We know that. We're in a virtual environment. We're talking about what's going to occur when school begins, right? And where we were when we left off. So these meetings could result in amendments upon return from closure, which means instead of having a formal meeting, we might have a discussion when we get back and say, you know, that goal needs to be tweaked a little bit, or that service needs to be tweaked a little bit, mom and dad. You know, can we agree that this change is made? And if so, then great, we'll make an amendment to the IEP, which will come out and will become an integral part of the IEP and be enforced. I don't think this is going to happen, but I do want folks to know that some components of the draft IEP may be similar to the current IEP, right? So if it's something simple within the IEP that may not have to be changed immediately, then it might be similar in the draft format, but of course subject to amendment when we come back from the school closure. You know, when I polled all the special educators about, you know, what they wanted to do, what they could do, where they felt they were, overwhelmingly, they all said, you know, I want to make sure I draft new accommodations. I want to draft new goals and objectives. I want to draft service delivery proposals, and I want to draft present levels of performance. I want to do that. So I don't anticipate this is going to happen. So you should definitely see some very fresh language in all the IEPs for review at the meeting. So we're going to start with annual reviews during the first month of the phase. We want people to feel really comfortable as they get into this process. Obviously, virtual meetings in general are difficult and hard to run. So we want our staff to feel really good about this, and then start eligibility meetings during the second month when the process becomes more comfortable to staff. We are not going to be completing evaluations during the time period because we just don't feel like we can complete a thorough and comprehensive evaluation when there's standardized assessment tools that have to be used and completed virtually. So for those parents who have reevaluation meetings coming up with their students, you may be asked to say, hey, can we have an annual meeting to make sure we have at least a new IEP in place so this one doesn't expire? And if that's the case, can we agree to an extended time frame to complete the evals and agree to continued eligibility until we can meet when school returns? All meetings are going to be facilitated by a special ed administrator. So that's an evaluation team leader, a special ed coordinator, Erin Miller, the director, or even myself. I envision that Erin and I are going to be hard at work kind of facilitating many of these meetings to make sure that we do as many as we can, do it meaningfully. For you folks that have out-of-district children, you may have different guidance entirely on IEP meetings. So every school that's out there is trying to do this differently. So obviously we're limited in Natick to kind of how we agree, what our schedule looks like, what our staff availability is. But many of the out-of-district schools are kind of doing their own thing. And so Catherine Garcia, our out-of-district coordinator, will make contact with you based on the specific program and availability of the schools to hold IEP team meetings. And there is a remote learning notification and guidance document regarding privacy in general that we would encourage parents to look at and know, you know, there are kids in the background, there are things happening in people's homes. So we're going to keep confidentiality in place, but obviously in a remote environment, it's more difficult to do so. So just being aware of some of the privacy things that could pop up during some of these meetings. So in terms of timeframes, we're looking at a part 1 and a part 2, right? So I had said earlier that annual reviews would be held at the beginning, and then we kind of look to reeval meetings or eligibility meetings afterwards. So we're thinking between April 27th and May 22nd that we would look at IEPs that are due to expire, annual IEPs that are due to expire by the end of the school year, right? Again, that 30-minute time frame is what we're looking at. This would include the annual portion of a reeval meeting where testing has not yet been completed, right? So
Tim,
yep.
It's Anna. While you discuss this slide, I just want to make sure we have a dad question about how will annual IEP goals and objectives be assessed without typical academic evaluations being used on these annuals? So if you can weave that into this slide, that would be great.
I sure can. So it's a great question. Right now, we're looking at where the child was when school ended, and then where it would when we pick back up. There's a lot of questions out there still about what regression will look like, what compensatory services might look like after the fact. We don't know where that's going to land yet, but we do know when we look at the annual reviews, we're going to be looking at data where the child was when they ended the school, ended before closure, and then the meeting or the new IEP will result in what would, from that point on, where they would go when they start the school year again. So these IEPs would also include the annual portion of the reeval meeting, where testing has not yet been completed. And that's important to note because in the second part of this phase, I'll start talking about reeval meetings where testing has been completed, but the reports haven't been provided yet. So stay tuned for that in part 2. Again, we'll have to kind of agree on a mutual agreeable extension to reeval timelines. And we, as a district, we want to say, we want to make sure that we have a solid IEP in place for Johnny or Michelle when the school year starts. So we want to agree to, continued eligibility until we can actually do the testing itself and then come back to the table, complete the eligibility criteria, and then draft a new IEP or amend the current one that we had done virtually to make it work for the student. So this will not, this first part will not include meetings to discuss eligibility, whether that's initial eligibility or continued eligibility. It doesn't include meetings that are going to be reconvenes if an IEP has already been proposed, or update meetings or meetings solely regarding transition. So there are sometimes parents or a team will request a reconvene, right? Or a parent will request an update based on an IEP that was already proposed. In those particular cases, we're really trying to focus on IEPs that will expire, right? So we don't want any kiddo to have an IEP not in place when the school year starts. That's our major goal here. So our priority being that some of those reconvenes or update meetings will have to kind of be put on the back bar, unfortunately. But there are some different ways to have conversations that we can address some needs around family or student concerns. So, please, Dr. Nolin.
Hi, a couple questions. So one mom is asking, just curious, why IEPs only during the office hours when we have the full school day available? And then she said she knows as a single working mom, is it because people need to take care of their own kids and working, and like what went into that conversation? So that's the first one. And then the second one is, will IEP correspondence be sent via email rather than mail and documents signed by parents? And I think we're looking into online signing, but I didn't know where we were with that, like DocuSign type things that you do with like your realtor.
Yeah, so the first question there is certainly, with anything that we're asking our staff to do comes with conversations with staff and making sure that we have agreement prior to doing so. And we actually allocated in our agreement with staff the office hours to do IEP type things because, yeah, they have home lives, right? And they have their kids at home and they're trying to get through the virtual environment, with their kids and a lot of things going on around them. So this gives them a kind of a time frame where they know they'll hold them, but it also gives the coordinator or the facilitator that same time frame, and then maybe the related service provider that same time frame. So it allows us to actually be able to schedule these meetings and have them during the office hours and be able to actually do it without trying to figure out how to schedule 300 meetings at different times during the day based on different people's schedules. So there was a lot that went into those office hours, and we actually made sure the special educators had that time within their schedule to be able to do just this.
And it should be also known that the way these meetings are handled in during the regular school day in brick and mortar school is that we actually hire subs to come in and sub the teachers out for these different meetings. So we furloughed all our subs and laid off all our subs, and there's no one to sub in for particular people to attend meetings that would be during the school time. And since during school time is only 50% of what it used to be, we really want them in front of the kids too. So it's like such a logistical nightmare, even when we're in school. And now we just don't have those same resources or the full 50%, the full day to see the kids.
Yeah. And again, our main goal is to make sure that they're teaching, right? That's our main goal during this process, so we can continue moving them forward to the extent that we can, right? So that's why we kind of move with the office hours. Dr. Nolin?
Yeah, I was just going to say, did we decide on which tool we're using yet for signing IEP correspondence?
Well, that was my next thing. So we're looking at DocuSign in order to sign electronic documents. So we're working on that right now. There's a variety of different things that we can do, and we'll talk about that. So we're going to be sending the documents out virtually to you. That is an absolute. And in terms of sending them back to us, there's different options, right? You could actually sign your name on that page, and you can take a photocopy of it. You can take a picture of it. You can email it back to us. We're going to get back to you on that. We're hoping to have a DocuSign document that you can do an electronic signature and send it back to us. So we have no requirement to handle paper at all. However, there is the option of emailing it and then having you mail it back too. We're going to be able to do that in cases where we need to, but hopefully we have an electronic way to do this very soon, very soon. So some of these annual meetings are also discussing transition, right, from 4th to 5th grade, or from preschool to kindergarten, or from 8th to 9th grade, or 12th plus, right? So, these may include partial discussions around transition if that annual review is happening and it's due to expire prior to the year. However, I want you to be aware too that some of those more in-depth discussions around that transition may take place outside of the IEP team meeting in coordination with the transition ETLs and or coordinators. So we have somebody that's a ETL that kind of runs from 4th to 5th grade, and somebody that does that from 8th to 9th grade. So those folks are going to be in contact with you to kind of have a more in-depth plan and discussion about what it might look like given the time frame of the IEP team meeting. And so following these meetings, an IEP will be proposed and or a notice of district action will be sent to the family following the meeting. So you'll definitely get a proposal after these and a notice of district action, and that will also come again electronically. So as far as transition goes, if the meeting is solely to discuss transition, again, we have to have meetings that are in order to not expire IEPs, right? And so that's our major goal here. So if you're just planning to have a meeting about transition of your child, we're not going to be holding those as formal IEP team meetings. We're going to be asking that evaluation team leaders and or the coordinators have conversations with you and discussions and come to a mutual agreement on things like what the transition process is going to look like for your child. What, if any, necessary changes to the IEP would be made or have to be made? And if you guys agree to those and agree to kind of that transition protocol and plan and any grid changes that might have to happen because the elementary is kind of one way and the middle school is another way, we're going to ask that an amendment be made to the current plan. But again, that has to be agreed to by both parties. So if we're in agreement, the IEP amendment and district action will be sent out to you following the conversation or the discussion. And if not in agreement, we may have to try to figure out to have a more formal team meeting process or try to anyway during the second part of the phase. Although there's no guarantee that with all of the other IEP team meetings that we have to hold in order to not have an IEP expire, that we're going to be able to guarantee that to occur. But again, for the most part, the transition process is just about a conversation about what it will look like for your child when they go to the middle school or they go to the high school or go to elementary. And that back and forth conversation will occur. And I want to make everybody know that's going to happen. We can make changes outside of having a formal meeting. And the flexibility of conversation with you and the coordinator or the ETL doesn't have to happen during office hours, right? That can happen on the coordinator's hours in the afternoon. It might be a time that, you're not online with your kiddo trying to help them out. And it would be a kind of a beneficial way to make sure that those conversations happen.
And Tim, I just wanted to reiterate that we've really worked in a process at the 4th and 5th and 8th to 9th grade level where we've started to talk about transition during annual reviews. So some of you might already have what we call a split grid, meaning that you have services for your students' current level and then the level they're moving into. So you might want to take a look at your IEPs and see what that looks like. But if you're unsure, just reach out to a coordinator and they can help you understand that process a little bit better or explain that to you or even revisit it.
Thank you, Erin. So the second phase or the second part of this obviously, beginning May 25th, and this could happen sooner depending on how the schedules go out, right? But we wanted to do this because of the reevaluation piece, and I'll get to that in just a minute. But obviously, we're going to continue doing annual meetings and continue having those transition meetings, as I already discussed. Now we're going to start talking about reevaluation and initial IEP team meetings, where we already have testing completed, right? So this is the case where, we've already done the standardized assessment protocols. The evaluation reports might not have been completed yet, but the testing itself that we don't feel confident about doing online has already been done, right? So in those particular cases, we would look at about a 45-minute time frame, hopefully. And obviously, eligibility for special ed services or continued eligibility will be determined if the data is there to make that determination. And based, if we actually have that comprehensive evaluation and we write it up and get it out to you and we have your input, I think that's something that we can do. And I'm not as concerned about not having that data. But, there could be conversations where, a parent might say, well, I need more of this data to understand it more. And the school might say, well, I need more of this. And in that particular case, we might have inclusive data. And then we might decide on that extended evaluation to get that data upon return from closure. And then again, a proposed IEP or a notice of action will be provided to you following these meetings. So any meeting that was scheduled to be held as an update and or a reconvene, right, that wasn't part of an annual, right, wasn't part of an annual meeting, or I'm sorry, that is not an annual meeting, aren't going to be held as formal IEP team meetings because we already have an annual in place. So IEP is in place by the point, when we get back. And so in these particular cases, the evaluation team leaders and or coordinators are going to communicate with families and discuss and agree, if we can, on any necessary IEP changes. So this might be where you're thinking, what, the IEP is, I'm a little concerned about this part. It's already in place. I want to have an update IEP team meeting to make changes. In those particular cases, the coordinator or ETL will contact you and say, hey, let's have this discussion and let's see if we can agree on an amendment to the current plan that we can send out to you to change the IEP. So when the school year gets kicked off, those changes are in place. Now, again, parents do not have to agree to an amendment, right? So if we say, an amendment can only happen if both parties agree to it. And so there's no proposal that comes out of this in terms of the schools proposing this and the parent rejects and all that. We would have a mutual agreement on what that amendment would look like in order for that to occur. And if there's no agreement, then we'll have to kind of meet when the school year, or when school resumes, right? I keep saying school year, thinking, it's not going to be the end of June now, but when school resumes. We're not going to be meeting to discuss outside evaluations at this time until we resume, unless that evaluation is being reviewed as part of the reevaluation or initial eligibility process, as we have already described. So there's a letter here, obviously, that I sent out yesterday. And in that letter, there's guidance kind of regarding, hey, this is what you should expect prior to the IEP team meeting, right? During the IEP team meeting and after the IEP team meeting, to give you kind of an idea of what things might look like, in the process. It also gives a very detailed kind of roles and responsibilities for the staff that are involved in those meetings, kind of what they'll do, what they'll report on, how the meeting will go, who will do what. So I would encourage you guys to really take a look at that. And then obviously, generate questions to your coordinators if you have questions about what that looks like. Again, this whole process is new to everyone. Different districts are doing it differently. Some are not doing IEPs at all. Some have gone full force and done IEPs before they even did remote learning. Many of those districts, by the way, are struggling mightily right now to get their remote service plans done. I like the fact that we did this in phases. And I think because we have the learning running in the way we do now, that we can really focus on this part and then make it really meaningful for all families. So at this point, I will take questions from folks in the comment box, and we can see if we have a little chat.
So we got through all the questions there, except for, are there any partial rejection meetings occurring or no?
We're not going to be doing partial rejection meetings at this time. However, those will be held at the end. However, that does not mean there cannot be a conversation about that partial rejection with the staff to see if we can't come to some kind of an agreement outside of the IEP team meeting. And if that's the case, then, we can come to an agreement and we can, resend the IEP with those agreements. But no, if we can't come to an agreement on partial rejections, then those will likely happen at the beginning of the next school year. Okay. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so I can see you all. Try to. It's hard when you're doing this. Let's see. So progress reports, I see a question came up about progress reports. Progress reports are going to be sent out along with the, in conjunction with the grade reports from different levels. So the elementary ROFs, I don't think there's a finalized plan on when those go out yet, Dr. Nolin, when they will go out, but we expect elementary progress reports to go out at a similar time frame as them. The middle school progress reports, I think were due right around last week, but we gave the middle school special ed staff until 30th of April to be able to send their special ed progress reports out. And high school progress reports that were sent out in February, I believe, Ms. Miller, February, just before closure. So when high school reports go out at the end of the year, when they do, there will be updated progress reports as well. So we're trying to be on the same schedule as the general education progress reporting.
Yeah, we are working on what's happening with the elementary report of student progress. It just doesn't make sense to do what we have done. And so each level is trying to create grading at the higher levels, but what makes sense in this environment. And that required us reaching out to colleges and working back from there. So all the colleges are putting out recommendations for what they expect to see. And they're all saying that a pass-fail scenario is going to be acceptable to them. And they're not looking for us to, pump up GPAs, or the entire nation is in that kind of discussion about, how colleges will look at this final semester of the year. So elementary, obviously it's not grading. We want parents to have a good sense of where their kids are, but we're also not able to assess them in the same way that we would have been if we had been live. So we're working through what's the best way to get you progress information. And once we figure that out and negotiate it with the teachers union, we'll be back in with that. A couple other questions came, Mr. Luff. If our private evaluation came in during March and we submitted in April, do we wait until the school year reopens? Our 3-year reeval was due in the fall.
So if a private evaluation came in during March and you submitted to the team in April, and there's a reevaluation that is on the books, right, that was supposed to be scheduled, the question is going to be whether or not that is there an IEP in place, first of all. If the team was meant to meet to do the reevaluation, then in phase 2 of this plan, if it's an eligibility discussion, that could occur after May 25th, right? Because the team would have to meet to review eligibility. The testing part itself has been presumably done, both on our part and on yours. If we haven't had the ability to do our standardized assessments, then that may be pushed to the fall. However, if we have done our standardized assessments, if we have an evaluation complete, there's an evaluation that comes to the table from the parent that's complete, then that could be an eligibility meeting that occurs right after May in that second part. I see another question about after a request for initial eval comes in, when does the day count? So as far as timeline goes, right now, the Secretary of Education, Ms. DeVos, has put forth a request to the federal government about timelines in general. And what she is requesting is that if school districts act in good faith to manage timelines, then what that looks like, there needs to be flexibility in order to meet them. That has not gone through yet. Mid-May apparently is when that will occur. Trying to define right now what good faith means. So once we have that definition, we'll get that out to you. But first of all, any initial evaluation can come in now, a request, right? So we're not going to stop that train. If you want to if you know families that want to make requests for evaluations, we're taking them, we'll take them in. However, you are correct that the school day count won't start until we actually start school again, only because we have that assessment, standardized assessment protocol that we'll have to do in these cases. So it would be when we reopen.
Someone's asking, do you expect the current remote learning service level to continue, or will support be reviewed in phase 3?
I think a lot of that depends on how phase 3 schedules roll out with the general ed staff. So right now, our general ed programming, in terms of when those classes are happening, also includes special education classes, right? So, for example, if one of our levels adds class time, right, that also means they're going to add special ed class time. So if you are in a sub-separate classroom, or there's a co-taught class, or it's a content special education class, right, then those would accordingly rise with those particular schedules. The alternating days is where we try to do the pull-out services. I don't imagine that those would change dramatically, but I think they would be more pointed as time goes on and providers get more apt at trying to provide services in this environment. So yes and no, I suppose.
Well, and maybe if I could, Mr. Luff, just address sort of a question that will come up at school committee on Monday. And that is that you can imagine how many different opinions there are from different types of families about what is the ideal remote learning situation right now. Working families have one idea. People with multiple children have one idea. People who are stay at home have one idea. People who are comparing to other school systems or private school have other ideas. So we put out the thought exchange to get feedback on what people want for this, what should we consider in this next phase of learning. I've also been meeting with the kids and the staff, and all of that will be a discussion on Monday evening at the school committee meeting. That said, it's no small task to prepare for a day of teaching in the online environment. I can only speak from my own experience as an online teacher at Boston College. I used to teach the same course in person that I now teach online. And this initial phase, it is like being a new teacher all over again. Our teachers today are reporting 3 hours of planning for every 3 hours of instruction, which is a lot more time than it takes in a normal day to do some planning, especially from our experienced teachers. So we're trying to work through that so that the teachers have the capacity to both educate their own children in their own homes and your children, and they can do the most that they can do in terms of new instruction. So it's really a whole new world in terms of figuring out what instruction looks like. So we're going to push everything forward that we can without breaking everybody, right? So that's staff, that's kids. The high school kids yesterday gave us really excellent feedback about what life is really like and what does it mean on the days that you're assigned your independent work days, what do office hours really look like. And so we will be making some tweaks to the model, and we'll be having a public discussion about that Monday. So thank you for your feedback. I do want to caution that more time, like scheduled time, isn't necessarily the answer, but that some people would like that. And that also means that there'll be more time for special education, as Mr. Luff said. So it's sort of a domino ripple effect, if you will. As we make changes, other parts will be updated as well.
I will tell you that the special ed staff were trying to, they have absolutely jam-packed their schedules trying to deliver services to kids, right? I mean, it almost to the point where we said, I love it. We need to make sure you have time to do some of the IEP things, like, because we know parents want to move forward with the virtual IEPs too, and those pieces. So we wanted to make sure those office hours were pretty sacred. We just have some really great staff out there that really love your kids, right? And they want to do everything they can for them, and that is no exceptionally has not changed during this process. I see, Chris.
Yeah,
Oh,
keep
go ahead.
going. You can read them. Go ahead.
Kristen, yeah. So if there's a partial rejection out there, we're going to be, having the actual coordinators identify if there are partial rejections out there, update IEPs that were supposed to be scheduled, and they'll be reaching out to you as well. Feel free to contact them, but certainly they will reach out to you if there's something in the books where we were supposed to meet because there was a partial rejection. And have conversations with you. That's going to be part of one of their duties over the next few months. Likely, it won't be until that second phase, but certainly that will be the correct direction. You can contact them. There are no more questions, but I would love feedback. Like if you guys wanted to send me an email, honestly, about how the service plans are going. I've heard great things. I haven't heard too many negatives yet, and I know that they're out there, right? So. And anything that we can do to tweak how we are trying to move forward in this environment, we're all ears and trying to hear that. If you want to touch base with CPAC too, and they can communicate with us about how things are going. Certainly, I know that there's I think an event tomorrow that CPAC is running for folks, and
Tim, there are a few more questions.
Yeah, you gotta scroll down a little bit.
You gotta scroll down.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so Hillary asks if you have an annual meeting coming up, when will the case manager reach out to you with the time and date? So it's not going to be the typical 7 to 10 day advance written notice, right? So we're going to ask parents if they're in agreement to hold an IEP during this process, if they'd be willing to give us 2 or 3 days of advance notice for these kind of things. So obviously they'll contact you. They'll say, hey, we have this date. Is this something that you're able to do and willing to do? And again, parents are not required to go through this process. So I want to make sure any IEP that you have in place now is going to continue or remain in place when we return until we can meet. So it would be probably, I'm guessing 2 to 3 days as they try to schedule these things. Let's see. Yes, IEP in place this coming fall. Oops, I just lost my chat.
Winthrop Storm has a question, Tim.
Okay. Can you actually read the question? I'm having a hard time.
Sure. Yep. How do we find out if an evaluation or a report that was started prior to COVID was completed? I reached out to our coordinator and received an unknown response. Not sure where this puts us in the IEP phases.
Yeah, so they will be in contact with you, right? So, Kennedy started last night, actually, immediately after I sent the emails out. With some, a Google form where they will ask you if you want to have a meeting with all these details, and so they'll be in contact with you about whether evaluations have been completed. You will likely know first if you're asked to have an annual review instead of the reevaluation, because that's that kind of first phase. So that might be the first communication that you get. Otherwise, you get communication saying, "Hey, we'd like to have an IEP after May, 25th, to discuss the evaluation that we have completed," and you would receive that evaluation prior to the meeting.
This question is for me, I think. Steve's asking if there's a change to the phase 3 schedule, will that happen the week of May 4th? And that would be the idea, that we would head through the phase as currently scheduled. And I have to renegotiate the entire teacher contract every time we make changes and updates to the scenario. So I'm on it. We're doing that now, and making that happen. So that would be the hope, that the May 4th would institute additional tweaks to the schedule. That said, I don't know what surprises are coming from the state. We're supposed to get something by Friday. They haven't put that forward. Now, typically they're about a couple weeks or phases behind NATIC, so I'm not super worried that they're going to come up with something that we haven't already put in place, but I could be surprised for sure. And then I think there's a question, Tim, about summer services. What's the current vision or timeline for a vision? And I guess I just want to say that the commissioner is supposed to come out with some expectations for whether and when we can have any summer services. We are fully prepared to provide them, and Mr. Luff can tell you about that. In person or virtually, we will do whatever we can to provide the most services to kids. That said, the commissioner has very clearly said he wants to weigh in on what we're doing here.
Yeah, so right now, actually, prior to the IEP provision, I've been working on phase 4 and 5 in my head too, and extended school year service is one of them, right? We have questions that are going to come up, not only about extended school year services, but what happens with regression of students and when are we going to provide kind of services based on the regression from closure and all those pieces. So we're actually working on renditions of both a physical schedule where we add time to the sessions and actually add classrooms to make sure we have more kids that can come in. But we're also working on a virtual way of doing that, as well as as a mix, right? Kind of a blended learning mix. Now, whether that is feasible or not, we're not really sure, right? We're gonna have to find staff that can work in both kind of systems, that would want to work in both systems. Would parents want to engage in more virtual learning? So there's a lot to think about there. I shared this the letter that I sent to you last night with Russell Johnson, our associate commissioner, yesterday. And he assured me that they are deep in discussions about extended school year services now and what that might look like. And he said that shortly they would have feedback and guidance for us on both the ESY pieces of it as well as the compensatory service piece of it. So a lot of conversation still going on, not ready to kind of present any final ideas there, but I hopefully soon that we'll have some information for you on what that might look like.
And no matter what happens, we want you to know that we will be tracking what parts of the curriculum are covered thoroughly and which ones are not in closure. And we will have a transition plan for both summer service learning and for the transition to fall, knowing full well, for instance, that whatever needs to be addressed from grade 3, we transition to grade 4 teachers and they start to address that. From there, at the high school level, it's really course by course trajectories, right? So if math class X didn't cover something that's needed for the follow-up class Y, we're making those transition plans now so that everybody knows what's left to be covered. I'm going to be strongly advocating for the cancellation of MCAS again next year. We regain a month of time instructionally when we eliminate MCAS. So you'll hear me out there kind of screaming about that, because it doesn't do us any good to keep testing kids if we haven't covered the things that we really need to cover. And the other piece I just want to say, as we head into what proves to be a very tight budget season upcoming, I hope that you'll stay tuned into budget meetings that we're watching, because at a time when students will be more fragile than ever, it is not the time to decimate the school budget. And we're all going to have to make some cutbacks if the economy continues to go the way that it is. But you know very well what happens when students come out of a period where they're not getting the maximum support that they need. And we need to come out of the gate strong next year to provide those services and to provide the right transition. And we're going to need to be able to keep the level of staffing that we have to do that. So I just want to put that out there, because we are going to need parents to understand what's going on with the budget and be advocates when we need them.
There's a question about extended school year services and summer services. So in the email that I had sent out, that we sent out last night, summer services and extended school year services are the same thing in that particular case. Also a question about option to keep your child back and repeat the year. Not for special education purposes, right? So that retention is always the decision of the principal based on very specific factors. The IEP team would not make that decision. However, it is not an encouraged option for many kids. And I especially through this closure, Dr. Nolin, I'm going to throw this one at you for the general portion of it.
The research on retention of students is quite poor. Most of the time, students who are retained do no better than if they stayed in the class, and indeed they are worse in terms of their self-esteem, their self-concept, and their efficacy, resiliency, etc. There's actually a lot of data and research on that topic. The criteria for a principal deciding to retain a student has to do with not mastering particular subjects, and it's not like on a unit by unit basis. So if your student had been progressing effectively through March when the closure came, we would not have the criteria to retain the student.
And Hillary asks if forms would come before the 2 or 3 day notice. Yeah, you'll get them. You'll get them probably at the 2 or 3 day notice to be shared with the team. So when you get the notice of the IEP, we'd probably give you a couple days to do the form, and then just as long as it's ready for the IEP, we're not going to say something like, "We didn't get this in time. We're not going to put it in the IEP," right? So we're going to be very flexible in our timing and how what we receive and how we gather information and put it in the draft IEP. So it's got to be flexibility all around. So you will get that prior to the meeting and hopefully have sufficient time to complete it. It should be pretty simple form, nothing extravagant, just really for you to provide input to what you would like in the IP and and how the kiddo's doing right now, right? And those kind of things.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Well,
you know where to find us if you have other questions.
yeah, very much appreciated. Thank you for coming out on short notice. I know we just sent the email out last night, so I really, really appreciate you guys popping in, and know that we're doing everything we can do for our kids, and that we have put together these phases so we can actually do it right. And I think it'll be very successful based on your support and our staff. And have a great night, and thank you very much.